Growing up, my worst memory has got to be when I stood above the world and watched the minds I used to enjoy fall away from me. There was a moment in time when the pride of my human soul and the careless attitude of my heart broke the foundations of my childhood. But I suppose that in life, childhood is meant to be broken. Nowadays specifically, it's as if we are designed to be consumed and left to rot while alone tempted with an idea of a love that will one day save us. In doing this, we lose our ability to stand alone, lose our ability to cope, and maybe it's a great plan designed to manipulate man. The creator's genius, if so. But to conclude would be an essay of great lengths. My worst memory is something I live every day, but it's also the most beautiful. When reality hit, and I grew up. Touched. The summer after 7th grade, my mom and stepdad got married. When they went away for a weekend for a honeymoon, they asked my soon-to-be freshman brother and I to stay at their place and watch the dog. They left a 6-pack of wine coolers for us to share and told us not to have any friends over. Later that night, my brother did have a friend over who brought a case of beer. My brother gave me his 3 wine coolers. We all drank for a long period of time, but I do remember finishing the wine coolers. Not long after that, I went and fell asleep in my bed. At some point, I woke up to my brother with his hand down my pants. He asked if I wanted to know what it was like to have sex. I was so confused and scared that all I could say was no. No other reaction, just no. And he pulled his hand out and passed out right there next to me. I got up right away and slept on the couch. I never knew if he remembered it or not. We have never really talked about it, even though we are pretty close. 2/13/2004. I remember coming home from school and seeing my dad lying on the ground motionless with blue lips. I asked my mom about it, and she said it was normal. I asked her for some food, and I ate on the table where my dad was sitting just a few hours prior. While eating my grilled cheese, my dad was fading away. After a while, my mom finally called the ambulance around 6 p.m. The paramedics confirmed that he was brain dead. Later, I learned it was a heroin overdose, and my mom took so long to call because she was still under the influence. If I called right when I got home from school, he would most likely be alive today. First fucking kiss. We were just dating for 2 weeks. Everything was good. We had fun. I could tell him anything and I felt like myself. Like I was actually complete. I just wanted to kiss him so bad. It was innocent. So we kissed. I had waited a year and a half for that moment, and then we never stopped. I didn't know I could lose track so easily with him, and things just got out of control. Everything started out so great. It was just supposed to be an innocent little kiss, and now our whole relationship is practically over. I didn't think much about that night, but looking back now, I know it's the worst memory I've ever made. Worst memory. Learning that one day, I'm going to die. I was 12 laying in my bed, and it struck me all at once. I was just a kid, and I finally understood the concept of nothingness, a vast, empty sea in the void. No heaven or hell, just nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I was no longer a child. Death. Watching my mom die in front of me, not being able to do anything because she is DNR. Aneurysm. Hearing the word aneurysm and realizing your mom is in God's hands and hoping your prayers are being heard but not knowing. Realizing there's a fine line between sanity and insanity and hoping that if you don't hear the words you want, then your mom will live, that you don't cross that line because you fear what is on the other side. The day my mom died. My worst memory ever still plays out in my mind every day. I got a call from the nursing home where my mom was staying. It was a voicemail. They were trying to get a hold of my dad. I called them back. I told them I would call my dad and have him get a hold of them. I then asked what was wrong. I figured they would tell me my mom fell or something, but instead they gave me the awful news that she had passed away that morning. While I try to have good memories of my mom, I still remember that call and can receive the conversation by heart. Physical therapy had visited her to resume therapy after a short stay in the hospital. The therapist went to the nurse's station at the home and told the nurses that my mom looked really pale and didn't look good. They better check on her. Nurses said they went to her room and they told me on the phone that they were very sorry, but my mom had passed away. It is such a sad memory, and I feel so bad that I didn't have one more moment with her. Worst memory. Going into my grandpa's bedroom to say goodbye to him minutes before he passed away from lung cancer. The passing of a loved one. My mom passed away a few months ago, and I got to the hospital a few seconds after she had passed. I went into the hospital room knowing it had already happened, and seeing her, lifeless, in the bed is something I will never unsee. Cheated. I can't hardly breathe. I had been so sick the past 2 weeks and my lungs feel like someone has shoved cotton balls down my windpipe. I haven't heard anything from my boyfriend in 2 days. I guessed he was just busy working, though my chest was tight. He was with my best friend, another girl, and they were alone most of the day. I finally tracked them down, at her house, of course. I walked into the house and looked for no more than 2 seconds. I ran back out the door, and it seemed like both my legs broke simultaneously. He finds me a crumbled mess on the sidewalks that I usually are littered with broken glass. He finally speaks. "I'm breaking up with you." That moment shattered all of my love and trust for the world in an instant. I guess part of me wished I died that instant so I didn't feel like the way I do now. Alas, life goes on. The slap. I was sitting in the kitchen. My stepdad was angry at me and drunk. Again. I think we were fighting about ketchup. So stupid, right? I was about 14 years old. My mom was at work. My sister was next to me. I was arguing with my stepdad and trying to defend myself, but he was always angry at me. I was a scapegoat for his frustration. I just remember crying, and then he came at me, raised his hand, and slapped me across the face as hard as he could. I remember sharp pain just moved right through my face, and my tears stinging where he had hit me. He told me if I kept talking, he would do it again. I just sat there weeping in disbelief and misery. I knew my mom would defend him, and I could never say anything, or I would never see my siblings again. At least that was what I was told. I never let it happen again, and I never let it happen to them. The details are hazy, but the idea is there. I was ready to end it all. I had multiple ways of going out. Every time I tried, I couldn't do it. I looked through the windshield of an oncoming car, I looked across the hall at my parents' room door, and I stopped for the sake of somebody else. I had lost all faith in myself. I was worthless in my eyes. But I couldn't do it to someone else. Reality. My mom, my sister, and I were with my dad the day he died. My mom and my sister had gathered up what few things he had left at the hospital. As I was walking out of the hospital room a minute or so later, I glanced back in and saw my dad's toothbrush laying on the floor. I was overwhelmed with sadness, loneliness, but most of all the stark reality of the finality of my dad's life. Unborn child. I remember getting pregnant at the age of 15 and being forced to have an abortion. Me and him no longer talk. I guess size double D breasts meant more to him than love. Anyway, I was well into the procedure when I felt the worst pain ever. The abortion had gone terribly wrong, and I am no longer able to conceive children. While I am only 22, the thought of never making my own special wonder haunts me daily. Too late. I didn't have many relatives my age. I'm the youngest in my family, and my parents are on the younger ends of theirs, so most of my cousins are significantly older than me. But there was one distant cousin who was exactly a year older than me, whose family owned a cottage down the road from my grandpa's house up north. We both spent large portions of our summers there and were great friends, but we never had any contact other than those summers. His family sold their cottage when I was about 12 years old, and I never saw him after that. Sometime last spring, I began to think about him and felt compelled to contact him. For a few days, he had periodically popped into my head, and I even found him on Facebook and wanted to send him a message, but I didn't. I guess I just felt a little awkward about it. I didn't really know what to say. 1 week later, he killed himself. I didn't know what he was going through, but I can't help but think that, hey, how's it going from an old friend might have changed something for him, or that my own experience with depression could have been sincerely helpful. I didn't necessarily feel guilty, and I know his situation had nothing to do with me, but it's hard to know that I chose not to do something so small and easy that could have made a huge difference. The first turned out to be the worst. I've been lucky enough to not have had to experience the pain of having someone leave or break up with me. At least, I had been lucky. Then in the spring and early summer of 2012, I finally learned what all the heartache was about. But it's not as simple as it sounds. She was probably the 6th or 7th serious relationship I'd been in, and only the second girl I'd ever lived with. I never thought of myself as a long-term commitment kind of guy, but she changed it. I asked her to marry me after about 2 years together, and she said yes. Then things started to go downhill. a friend of mine who had been living away moved back to town. My girlfriend and I started fighting more, and I couldn't get her to get excited about planning the wedding with me. She and my friend who moved to town started hanging out as friends, nothing secret, and I was fine with it. I trusted them both, but things were still declining. Finally, one night we fought, and she declared she was moving out. I thought she was just saying meaningless things in the heat of the moment, but the next day when I came home from work, her stuff was gone. Fast forward a week or two, we spoke and decided to remain friends, which I took to mean I might still have a chance to fix this. Fast forward a few more weeks, and I was learning that my friend was still hanging out with her, which was hard on me, but I tried to take the high road and not make a big deal out of it. Finally, one day at work, I got an email from her saying she wanted to officially start dating him. I lost it. I tried to find my friend at work, and luckily I didn't because I probably would have killed him. Long story short, I went through a time where I was as low as I could get. I considered ending it all, but didn't because I decided they weren't worth it. I haven't seen or spoke to them in 2 years, and I moved on. My childhood. My mom was in her early 20s when she had me, and I don't think she was ready to give up her old lifestyle when she had me. So I think she took out a lot of her frustration and resentment of my dad on me. She used to throw parties at our apartment. Strangers used to flow in and out, and when she went to parties, she would regularly leave me at home, alone for sometimes days, up until I was in 3rd grade. Then when her boyfriend came over, she would lock me in my room, so I would entertain myself by singing to forget about how hungry I was since she wouldn't leave me food. Then one Christmas Eve, I told her I missed my dad. She slapped me, picked me up, and threw me in the snow and threw my clothes at me. She told me that she no longer wanted me, and if I waited in the snow, someone would pick me up. I gathered my belongings and cried on the other side of her door, begged for her to let me back in, and told her how much I loved her. This happened when I was 6 years old. I have never talked about this with my mom. I don't know if she remembers this, considering she was drunk at the time, but it's something I've never been able to forget. The only people who know about how my mom used to treat me are my dad, my stepmom, previous therapist, and previous lawyer. Although therapy helped me, and my mom grew up out of her ways, I still have nightmares every now and then. Trapped in the pantry. Sometimes I believe I can really relate to R. Kelly, being trapped in a closet and all. I had a similar experience with the R&B singer, except instead of being trapped in a closet, I was trapped in a pantry. When I first started going to preschool, I had a hard time adjusting. The kids all really freaked me out. This one kid was wearing a Batman costume and came up to me and yelled, "Roar my Batman." I was traumatized. So naturally I did what any 3-year-old would do. I cried it for my mommy all day long. I think the staff got so annoyed with me crying that they shoved me into the preschool pantry, locked the door, and waited until I stopped crying. I could still visualize the bright light coming from the crack in the door, illuminating the canned soup. I only went to preschool for 4 days because I would start hysterically crying whenever my parents came near the building. Luckily, I was able to get over my fear of children. I had what I considered a very successful time in kindergarten, a few years later. Fireworks. It was the 4th of July, and my sister had been missing for a few hours. My mom and I made phone call after phone call, hoping we would get some word of where she was. But deep down, we had an idea. She had gotten into some trouble with a girl from school and started doing drugs. These drugs made my sister into someone she isn't and would make her do things she had no recollection of. Once we found my sister, it turned out she wasn't too far away from her house. She stumbled in through the door, and my mom went up to hug her, but was pushed away. My mom began crying and begging my sister to talk to her, or at least give her a hug. The battle went on for about an hour, until my sister shoved my mom into the wall and ran out of the house. My mom then laid down and began to scream about my sister's friend and how she ruined my sister's life. Through her sobbing, "I want to kill her," ran through my ears. Again and again, hugging my legs and my chest, I sat next to my mom and gazed at the wood floor that reflected the bright colors of the exploding fireworks. Unfriended. I was in 7th grade, and at my school we had these things called socials. So before the social, I told my 2 friends my biggest secret I could have told someone. This secret was about this boy I had known for a very long time. When we were younger, we kissed inside a box. I promised never to tell anyone. I'm a girl. Well, so I thought my friends could keep the secret to themselves. And I thought wrong. We all went to the social, and one of my friends decided to take it upon herself and go ask this guy about my secret I told her. So next thing you know, he was coming up to me and yelling at me. The whole event ruined the night. I sat in the entrance crying into my arms the rest of the night. And when the teacher asked me if I was okay, of course I said I was fine, when I really wasn't. I regret not saying anything to the teacher and saying anything to these 2 friends. Next, the 2 friends came to find me with my head inside my arms crying. They had no idea what was wrong. What assholes! Then it was time for us to go, so I got in the car to go, and then they thought they would buy me ice cream to make it all better. I mean, at the time, I think it did, but in reality, it really did not. From then on, I have hated these two people. I know hate is a strong word, but this is a hate-worthy moment. They ruined my relationship with this lifelong just guy friend. Ruined! I have grown further and further away from both of them. They are so untrustworthy. Snot rocket to the moon. My freshman year of high school, I had a very large crush on my best friend. I always sat next to him at lunch because it was one of the few times we could actually see each other during the day. I've been battling a cold for about a week, but it was finally starting to clear up and I could on occasion breathe out of my nose. One day during lunch, my crush was telling me a funny story. It wasn't hilarious, but chuckle-worthy for sure. I let out a quick little chuckle, but to my dismay, a huge snot rocket flew from my nose and onto the lunch table. Because I sat with a bunch of guys, they were more than entertained than disgusted. It was the worst memory and embarrassing moment of my life. And of course, my uncontrollable mucus combustion was 10 times funnier than the original joke. Luckily, my sense of humor triumphed, and I can still get a laugh out of what I would consider one of my worst/most embarrassing moments and memories. Loss. It was summer, and my dad had taken my brother and I to the video store to rent a movie since our mom was out of town. This was the day I lost my brother, and I have never felt so scared in my entire life. For some reason, he was standing next to us, and instantly he vanished. Neither my dad or I saw where he could have gone, and we began running up and down each aisle screaming his name. Time had stopped. I couldn't breathe, and I felt as if the world was ending right there. Never in my life had I felt so disappointed in myself. It was always my job to keep an eye on him, and I failed. All I could think about was that I lost my brother forever, and I would never forgive myself. I had one job, and I failed. Thankfully, he had just wandered off into an adjacent aisle, and a store clerk found him. Since that day, almost 15 years later, I always ask him where he's going, because I never want to relive that moment again. My father's struggle. The worst memory I have is when I went back to Nebraska after I found out my dad had cancer. Then taking him to the doctor who told us there was no cure, and he had less than a year left to live. Family dinner. Coming home from school late in my high school career for dinner. My dad was waiting with his table set for 3. There's 4 of us in my family. My father prepares to have a normal dinner with my brother and I, while my mom sits in the living room crying by herself. Trying to have family dinner conversation doesn't go well when you have to speak over the sound of tears. I left the house, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't finish my dinner, and my parents are no longer together. Objectification. When I was younger, I made a lot of bad decisions, one of them being to do a couple pornos. When guys I work with found them, my past was made very public and brought into the harsh neon lights of objectification through social media and revenge porn websites. I was, and am to this day, continually harassed by coworkers who assume that I will fuck anybody who shows interest because that's what porn stars do. None of them have the thought cross their minds to even ask or show interest in my reasonings behind my actions, but rely on the safety of their assumptions through social media, anonymous comments on revenge porn websites, and conversations that don't know I overhear. The looks, the actions, the words is a disgusting example of what the human race has devolved into. Not one coworker knows, nor cares, that I did it to help my girlfriend pay for her chemotherapy. Not that it really matters. I don't regret it for 1 minute. But I consider it my worst memory because it's not only my past, but my present and my future, and it battles my will to see the good in all people. I can't help but pity the majority of our society with the stark realization of just how cruel and ignorant they can be. Worst memory. My sister's funeral. The day college changed. I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was a sophomore in high school and have been on medication since then, so not everyone knows about it. Well, that all changed one day. I'm currently a freshman in college, and at the college I attend, there's a class all freshmen are required to take called College Issues Colloquy. My class was in our local coffee shop that day because a professor decided to give us a break from midterms. So nice. As we were sitting there, I looked at my roommate, who was in my class and knew about my epilepsy, and told her that I wasn't feeling so hot. I think she told me to tell our professor, but I'm not sure. I was sitting next to him, and I know that he grabbed me and told the other students to push the table away so I don't fall or hurt myself. I guess this is my worst memory because I lack so much memory of the event. All I know is that when I woke up, I was in the hospital. I knew that when I got back, everyone would know me as the weird freshman who had seizures. I was mortified. I cried a little bit, called my mom. She cried, let me talk to my dad. He calmed me down a bit. But that was the day the athletic trainer was also prohibited me from playing basketball, for now anyways. I'll probably play next year. Basketball was a big reason I came to this particular college, so that was a big hit. It's all just frustrating, but I think it will get better. Maybe. My best friend's mom's boyfriend. I would stay over at my friend's house almost every weekend when I was younger, but her family life wasn't the best. Her mom was dating this jerk of a guy who I'm pretty sure beat my friend's mom and possibly her. I remember one time when I went there, I walked downstairs to do something. He was sitting in his computer chair drinking a beer. As I walked past him, he stopped me and he asked me to lift up my shirt to see my boobies. I was 11 years old. So I ran and locked myself in their laundry room. I still went over there after that, and I don't really know why. He would give me kisses goodnight, and not just like a father would kiss his daughter goodnight. It was a real kiss. I have no idea what I was thinking going back to her house every weekend. The night my sister had her stroke, I didn't know what was happening for a good 12 hours. I couldn't see her in the hospital because she was having surgery. I thought I wouldn't get to say goodbye. Longest night of my life. Definitely my worst memory. Worst memory. One of the worst memories I had revolves around disappointing my mom. Worst? My worst memory is probably when I was at my great uncle's funeral. He had cancer for 10 years to study for medicinal science, and he got really bad the last year he was alive. When he was in the hospice, he didn't want any of the kids in the family to see him, so when I saw him at his funeral, it was devastating. It was the first time I've seen so many people cry at once. The day my mom and dad knew I was high because I smelled like dank and my eyes were as red as the devil. Worst memory. I was swimming, then I got stung by a jellyfish. Middle school music class. I was late to school, like 2 weeks late. On my first day, I was going to sit down. Unfortunately, the chair was right in front of everyone, and some boy pulled my chair away, making me fall to the floor. I was so embarrassed that I left the room crying and spent the remainder of the class in the principal's office. Death of a friend. On Christmas Eve of 2012, I discovered through Facebook that a friend of mine had been killed while on duty. She was a police officer. 2 days later, I learned that it was her husband who had killed her, which I also knew. Both had made an impact on my life and encouraged me to pursue art. Why me? In 7th grade, a teacher of mine asked each of the girls individually, "Why do you hate me?" A 13-year-old girl at a private school shouldn't have to 100% love her teachers or school. Most uncomfortable confrontation ever. Unexpected surprise. I had just told my best friend that I'd be one of her bridesmaids when another friend called me. She asked if I would help calm down one of her friends because she had just left with a guy that was married. When I went with her and heard her story, realized that he wasn't married, but engaged to be married to my best friend. Worst memory. Probably the worst memories for me are memories I'm ashamed to hold on to, like memories of an ex. One specific memory I wish I could replace would be one of my ex and I walking downtown after a blizzard hit Lawrence, and we were the only people out. We owned the street. Another memory that is particularly bad was just after my mom found out I had overdosed. My mom ran upstairs to my bathroom to see how many pills I had taken. She found an empty bottle. That is probably the coldest and most distant I have ever seen my mom. When she said, "Well, you might just have done it this time. You might have finally killed yourself." Heartbreak. I think the worst memory I had was when she told me we were over. She wasn't sure if she could see a future with us and had so much going on. She thought it was easier to end it, and I felt like I couldn't breathe or be myself for a while. I felt like I was going through the motions of being here. I really felt like I was empty for a while. It was like she was there as a friend, and I was trying to deal with the fact that my heart felt so empty and dull that everything around me was melting. And I felt like I wanted to lay in bed and just cry every day. Overdose. My best friend tried killing herself by taking an excessive amount of depression pills and other medications. I knew something was wrong. She texted me in the morning. Nothing made sense. I didn't understand what she was talking about. It looked like she said, "I love you," but I'm not really certain if it was that. I knew something was wrong, so I called her dad, and he rushed her to the ER. If I wouldn't have called her dad, she would have been dead. Her dad called the school, and I was called into the office by the school social worker. She told me I saved her life, and that our entire family was extremely grateful that I called my friend's dad. It was the hardest experience I went through, especially when she was hospitalized after that. but it brought us closer in a way, but also made us grow apart. Her and I still talk to this day, if we aren't as close as we used to be. My dad. The day at the hospital when my dad had a heart attack and took him upstairs, I knew then it was the beginning of the end, almost as though I had saw it coming. The look I saw in his eyes, the fear, the pain, and the knowing, I knew then life would never be the same for him, for me. I was losing him, he was leaving me. 4th grade vomit accident. We were starting our morning off by having all the 4th graders stand up behind their desk and all faced one side of the room. The American flag hung on the east side of the wall in the classroom, and one of my friends sat in front of me, next to the smaller, scrawny Asian boy. As we all started reciting the pledge, the young boy proceeded to extrude vomit from his mouth all over the backside of my friend's shirt and pants. We all had to abandon the classroom for a few hours because of the horrible smell that drifted throughout the room. I will never forget all the vomit that came from that boy's little mouth. Divorce. When I was 12 years old, my dad, recently divorced from my mom, came over to our house to pick up some medicine for my brother. It was early morning on a school day, so I was in the kitchen eating breakfast before packing up to walk to class. My dad went looking for the medicine without talking to my mom and walked into the guest room where he found my mom's boyfriend, not my stepdad, asleep. It was the only time I ever heard my dad swear. I remember him running around the house yelling. He was so angry he lost all sense of what he was doing. My mom came in and got me and my stepdad and got us into the car while my dad chased us out of the house. He was even hitting the car trying to get at us. It was horrifying, and my dad and I, never really recovered from that day. You can't really unsee that kind of anger in somebody. When I was in 1st grade, apparently on the school playground there was a big sewer, and I decided to take a piss in it and was sent home. Not so sob story. Missing qualifying for state gymnastics senior year by a fourth of a point. Sad. Loss of a brother. Almost. I was in 6th grade and my brother was in 8th grade when he went on one of the school ski trips. It was a perfectly normal trip. It wasn't the first one he went on, but it was the last one he went on. It was at like 9 or 10 at night when my dad got a call that my brother had gotten into a serious accident while snowboarding. They said that he was going to the hospital and that my dad or mom or both were needing to meet them there. Of course, my parents went to the hospital extremely worried and scared. They wouldn't let me or my sister come with, so we had to just wait to see what had happened. Apparently, he had fallen headfirst on an ice patch at the hill and had broken a bone in his head that if moved slightly over would have punctured his artery and would have killed him instantly. Thankfully, they had to just keep him at the hospital overnight to make sure he didn't go to sleep because of his concussion and for them to make sure the bone didn't move. When he got home, he was all mad that he couldn't play video games because the stress could make his blood pressure too high in the artery. Thankfully, he healed perfectly fine. I didn't lose him. This experience just makes me realize that I might have huge differences, disagree, and don't like being around my family sometimes, but truly, if something were to happen to any of them, it would be the most pain I would ever experience. Broken. The night my husband told me he had been seeing another woman with children, I wanted children, and it just wasn't happening. My heart broke. It was my first heartbreak. I could feel it. People die from broken hearts. I did not. I lived to have my heart broken 2 or 3 more times. Not sure it can take another one, but those heartbreaks might have made me or my heart stronger, but I can't tell. I feel all the pain of each heartbreak every day of my life. Nothing seemed to improve. I took the wrong direction, always living a fine line between happy and devastation. I don't think anyone can tell because I have an amazing gift for hiding that darkness that lives in me. I can't recall a happy dream in years. All dreams are those of who broke me. They still break me in those dreams. I think people are supposed to move on and get over it. I did not. My heart has not let go of the pain it suffered. Still never wake up happy, never go to bed happy. I don't even have a passion for anything. I don't want to die, but I don't want to live. I lost myself. Those heartbreakers have moved on and lived happy lives, I think. I've been living as this mess for a very long time. I am afraid I will die unhappy. I am alone. I have dear friends and family, but something is missing or gone. I prefer to be alone, but I have to participate in life I have. Having a broken heart is a bad thing for me, and that it never healed. It was supposed to, but it didn't. So I was told time makes it better. It does not. I read about this, all this hype to be happy and let it go and move on, etc. It's all meaningless to me. How do I change what goes on in here? My heart, my mind, no fucking clue. Trapped, stuck, doomed, wasted. I think I could be happy, but how? Maybe this is just all there is. I tried to help. I'm still working against my worst memory now. I finally filed charges against him, but apparently a 2-year-old case takes a while to get through the DA. My worst memory is the night he raped me. The proper term in my case is criminal sodomy. I've already given a full description of the event to the police, but the short version is that he needed help one night, escaping from his hallucinations. And when it came to help, he snapped. He claimed not to remember it, even after all this time, yet I'm stuck with the panic attacks and horror. I once had a moment of terror when I thought I saw him standing above me, holding my throat again, growling like some inhuman beast. I just wanted to help him. I loved him. Now even my mother calls me broken. Untitled. When I go to think of the specific worst memory, I find the task difficult because I am overwhelmed with a feeling. Instead, I am reminded of a long, lingering state of depression. Feeling. There are certainly moments that peak to define the feeling such state of depression, but in memory, I identify strong with the impression of feeling that situation I was in made me feel. My moment of desperately trying to find a solution to my one night popped into my head shortly after the memory of my mom ignoring my confession of being depressed, only to find out years later she shrugged off my cry for help due to the fact that she was intoxicated. When downing a bottle of wine a night becomes a daily activity for someone, drunk becomes their way of living and sober slowly stops existing. This is only a small look into the situations I had to endure while living with an alcoholic. My worst memory was having no value for life. My worst memory was feeling hopeless and worthless. I was lost. P.S. Junior year of high school, I realized art was my calling. It's what keeps me going and is my means of self-expression. I will always value the therapeutic benefits I reaped from creation. They are the happy endings to depression. My friend Ben. It was a Sunday afternoon about 10 years ago. I was playing a Star Wars video game. I remember my mom calling me into the dining room, where she was crying while on the phone. I was startled and upset to see my mom like this. She got off the phone and looked me in the eye. She said she got off the phone with another mother of one of my football teammates. She received news that my friend and teammate, Ben, died yesterday on his way back on a hunting trip with his dad. He died from brain aneurysm. I remember my heart instantly sinking. I couldn't believe it. Ben was the only child and full of love, one of the nicest kids I've ever met till this day. On the day of his funeral, my entire team put on their jerseys and said our chant for everyone to hear. After that, I shook both his mom and dad's hands. I'll never forget his mother's handshake. It was the firmest/strongest handshake. The part that hit me the most was the feeling, the pain behind her eyes. I never want to feel that way again, nor see anyone lose their child. My friend Ben. How I lost my innocence over the course of about 3 minutes. The 2017 class of Linden High has gone through a lot. We've had more than our fair share of pretty serious talks from our teachers. We've had all the talks about drugs, safe sex, etc., just the usual things that most immature high school and middle school kids find hilarious. But we've had talks about other things also. Like the time we were told that our classmate Alec was seriously sick and in the hospital. Then all the talks after that where the teachers would get us all together and read up the ridiculously fake doctor's reports that did nothing but give the kids that didn't have a clue false hope. Then came the talk where we all knew that Alec wasn't going to make it. And of course after he died, called the heartfelt talks about dealing with grief and blah blah blah. Now, That was a pretty horrible time for everyone in my class. There was a lot of tears and anger and sadness and everything in between. We didn't think it could get any worse. We were so wrong. 2 years later, we had another talk. We all got called into the science room. Our classmate Nick had shot himself, was in the hospital, and wasn't expected to make it. Have you ever felt so much pain emotionally that it hurts physically? I have. It's horrible. It's like being stabbed straight in the gut. Nick died that next day, but when I got the news that he was officially dead, it was okay. I could take it. I knew it was coming. It's the same way with Alec. I had at least a tiny bit of closure then. But sitting in that science room, I had no idea what was coming. No idea that within the next day I was going to have 2 dead classmates. I can't even begin to describe half of the emotions I had after learning that my friend and classmate had attempted suicide. It's something I can't put into words, and it's something you wouldn't want to even hear about. And so, sitting in that science room, getting that news, is my worst memory ever. Cinderella, the girl sitting by herself, the fake smiles plastered everywhere, the voices in her head, they raise higher, higher. They won't stop. Get them to stop, get them to stop, get them to stop. There she goes. What a tragedy beautified. Stop the tape, press the rewind. It all seemed too perfect. Life seemed too happy. He made the voices go away. Smile after laughter, after smile. Then the punches came, one word after another and another. He loves her, he says. He'll be there forever. More words, she still believes him. The perfect couple, the dream team. Look at the smiles and laughter. Wow, she's a good actor. 3 a.m., she thinks of becoming a painter. What a beautiful canvas, red, what a wonderful color. No, she can't, she won't. She works so hard. Her crown lower and lower. Fast forward, the picture is torn, the mirror is broken, she gave up. The voice raised, higher, higher, higher. It won't stop. How does she stop it? She hopes. She prays. Can she get a savior? The camera snaps, smiles captured. That was then. One of the frames cracked, her heart fractured. Can you save this broken mess? It's done. Game over. She tried to win. She tried to play. What will her mother think? What will her sisters say? Sorry for the mess. I hope it's not too hard to clean up. Her final thoughts. The clock struck midnight. But she's no longer Cinderella. A memory of my father. It is important for you to have a little background information for you to understand this memory. There isn't much to the memory itself. It was just a small fire burning up a small portion of the surface of the wooden deck of my home. My father is an alcoholic. I could write an entire book about all the things my family has gone through because of this fact, but I'll keep it short. When I was 14, my father lost his job. I guess you could say that triggered it. My father's descent into addiction was rapid, spiraling downward until he was practically semi-conscious for weeks on end. Nothing my father did or said could make him stop. That's one of the first things you learn about alcoholism. You are completely and utterly helpless. The change has to come entirely from the addict. When I was 15, I remember being home alone with him. He was on the deck, ambling around trying not to fall over. My mother and sister were at work, and I shut myself in my room, considered leaving, maybe walking to a friend's house. Can't remember why I went into the kitchen. I just remember looking through the glass of the sliding door and seeing a small fire burning away at the deck. I don't even know how it started. He was attempting to use a power washer and something went wrong. I remember that I didn't completely panic. I walked outside through the doors and onto the deck. It was July and it was hot out. I remember now, weeks ago, during a period of sobriety, my mom had asked him to power wash the deck for my sister's upcoming graduation party. I walked over him, probably yelling, physically pushed him away from the fire, walked over to the hose, filled a bucket, and doused the flames. I don't know if he was even coherent enough to understand what was going on. I called my mom. By that point, I know I was crying. I don't even remember what happened after that. I don't remember a lot of that memories I have from that time. I was 14 at the time I left home for college. Memories kind of funny like that. It tries to help you forget things, but you end up left with patches, roughly strewn together and largely incomplete. I don't remember how many times he has relapsed. I lost count after the number reached double digits. You always think the next bad thing to happen will put a stop to it. Fire, jail, hospital. But it doesn't. The charred spot is still left on our deck, burnt into the surface of the wood. My dog's death. I woke up, heard she wasn't moving. We went over, saw maggots eating the lower half of her. She was still alive during. The vet came over the same morning, said it didn't look good. They brought her in a pickup to the vet. I was scheduled to hang out with friends that same day. I did, but all I thought about was her. As soon as my mom got a call from the vet, I rushed home and we drove to the vet as she was taken to. Rushing over there in our car and got caught in a speed trap. We were 45 minutes late and we told the policeman we were in a hurry and he said, as he was writing the ticket and looking up our information. We finally got into the vet and he said it didn't look good for her. He told us what was happening to her, that essentially the entire lower half of her body was dead, and that's why maggots were eating it. We as a family decided right then and there, after having been given the option, that she should be euthanized. My brother and I couldn't watch, so we went outside. We bawled our eyes out. I regret not standing there next to her. I was a fucking coward, I was. 2 months later, the end of the summer, my mom was trying everything in her power to get us a new dog. She won that battle. I was never ready. I'm still not ready for this dog we have now. I've been depressed every day since, and all I want more than anything in this world to this very day is to walk into my backyard and call your name 4 times and hold you in my arms. Just like in the spring where the grass was green and you were a white puppy up in the days when you were this golden goddess whose coat outshone even the brightest yellow of that summer ground. And I had to tell you goodbye. You are the most beautiful woman I know till this day. I love you beyond what I could even fathom. I love you, my friend. And I wish you well in every eternity and next. Hyatt Regency disaster. It was 1981 and I was 29. I had just finished a show at the Apple Valley Farm Theater out on Lake Perry. I was driving home to Lawrence at about 11:30 p.m. when my friend said, "Hey, you should listen to this. Something really bad just happened in Kansas City." I ignored the news and we drove. I arrived home to a group of friends watching TV and talking about part of a building collapsing. I ignored it. I then got a call from my younger sister who was 18 at the time, a senior in high school and prone to drama. "Mom and Dad went out and have not come home yet," she said. I answered, I'm sure they're just out having fun and will be home soon. Call me in half an hour if you haven't seen them." I turned to the TV and it was talking about a tea dance at a hotel downtown called the Hyatt Regency Hotel. The announcer said that it was the big band music that brought people out that night and the skywalks had collapsed and an unknown amount of people were under the rubble. I drew a deep breath. I knew my dad and mom would be wherever there was big band music. Night wore on, but the worst memory was driving home and imagining what if one was dead and the other was a vegetable for the rest of life? What if one had no arms or legs or any of the awful combination of things? I drove and I drove in the night. Then I thought, what if they were both gone? Nah, I thought, I would know that. I would have felt something. I arrived home and the neighbors were at my parents' house just to sit with my sister. They knew her siblings were grown and not living at home, so they didn't want her to be alone that night. We sat up most of the night and talked and waited and called the Red Cross repeatedly and got recordings of the "please call back, the lines are jammed." We finally fell asleep and as the dawn came, I woke to a phone call from the Red Cross asking me to come downtown to the office. I did. And it was there that they told me both my parents had been killed that night as the skywalks collapsed. They handed me their personal belongings to take home, then sent me to the morgue to identify their bodies. I was spared that since a wonderful family friend, a pathologist, identified them for me. I could no longer ignore it. I had to let go. In my 22 years on this planet, my eyes have witnessed powerful, moving moments, whether it's voluntary or completely by accident, beautiful or tragic. We can't begin to understand why we are exposed to the things we are. Is it some curse from some unnatural cause? Are we unlucky, or is this a blessing in disguise? Will we be able to move on and grow due to these impacting moments in time? It was 2 years ago in June, the 14th to be exact, and I started out like any other summer day around that time. I laid in bed staring at the same old shade of orange that plagued the walls inside my room. I was wide awake, awaiting the inevitable blaring of my alarm clock to ring in my ears. I always had a knack for being up before my alarm and thinking about how I would make my day different from the last, or groaning about how I'd have to get up in the next few minutes. You see, I'd fallen into a routine of lifestyle. I'd get up, grumble, shower, and sing, eat breakfast, surf the web, iron my clothes, brush my teeth, leave for work. Then 8 dreadful hours and hundreds of customers later, I would come home late night, eat, watch a little TV, sleep the rest of the night away. Then repeat with the same ritual. Yes, my life felt like it was on autopilot then. But on this day, and this particular day, my life would change forever, and I would be left with a wound of a memory that would never heal. The car I usually drive, a tannish gold Mazda MPV's minivan, was in a shop about 15 minutes away. So my mom and I stopped there before I went to work. The sun shone through, beating down on my forearm that hung outside the window as we coasted through the baking pavement. The inside of my uniform clung to my interior with a slight moisture while the kids in the local playground teased me, running through streams of water as we passed by. The air conditioner was broken. You can tell I was a little hot and bothered. The time we spent at the automotive graveyard seemed to be an eternity, and the heat wasn't helping my mood. Fortunately, but unfortunately, we all returned to the car, but my baby still needed repairs, and so we left. I closed my eyes for a bit, knowing that the chaos in my local grocery store was soon to be upon me. If not for the steady pay, the raise, promotions, and the school bills I'd gotten, I doubt I would have stayed there too much longer. My eyes regretted the blinding sunlight, only to find that moments later we were parked in front of the hospital. We rode the elevator up to the upper level to visit my father, who had been around hospitals and nursing homes the last year or so. Since before I was born, he was living with diabetes, a condition that runs in his family, and the last 3 years had brought the most change in his situation into mine. He started out needing surgery for his ankles for circulation and issues, and soon after, the wounds just weren't healing right, and he ended up having both legs amputated to the knees. The fact that he was on dialysis didn't help either. It was a horror to see him like this. He was always an incredible social person who loved going fishing and roaming the city to visit family and friends, along with working. After his surgery, things got even worse. It was unreal for me. The man who had always been there and taken care of me, my parent, now relied on me and my family. It got to the point where he couldn't provide the care he needed. He was sent into a full-time nursing home, and that was a whole other ordeal. Jumping from place to place, he was subjected to the lack of care that you often hear about in these places. Visits were never enough for me, and I always felt so guilty about being away at college, not being able to be with him all the time. It didn't help that we were already struggling financially with my mom being laid off, medical bills. My very college career was threatened. Just like my dad, he was in high spirits, but I was low and couldn't understand why. Why were we suffering like this? My dream was to be successful and take my family from the grief we've known. I was at my breaking point, and the fact that I kept all the chaos to myself didn't help. After a while, he was unable to communicate coherently, and soon not at all. The spark had just left him, all the tubes winding in and out of him. He'd grown weak and wasn't able to eat, much less more perform simple bodily functions. We knew that it wouldn't be long. We arrived in his room in hospice the day of the June 14th, a day I'll never forget, and we sat around talking to him, though he couldn't respond, and I wasn't sure if he could really hear or focus on us at this point. His eyes were half closed and his breathing was labored. It was unsettling to see how thin he'd gotten and that he was barely holding on. My sister and nephew arrived, and we talked for a bit, then decided to leave. We walked over to say our goodbyes until tomorrow. I took his hand in mine and told him I loved him. He stood there silently a few moments, listening to the only sounds of his breath, when suddenly he breathed in deeply and rasped out his last breath. He was gone, right there before my eyes as I stood over him. The world around me seemed to stand still, and my heart dropped into the deepest hole inside me. The silence was broken by my mom's words. "Oh Lord, I think he just passed." She checked his pulse, and it was confirmed. I backed away into the wall, and the tears came pouring. A flurry of emotions ran through me: sorrow, anger, grief, despair, and anguish. Why did he have to go? Why was this happening? I needed him. He was supposed to be at my graduate college, see me married, and have kids. These selfish thoughts couldn't help but run through my head. I was not ready to let go. A phone call later, and the whole family knew. All my brothers came in, and the pain took me. I tried to comfort my young nieces, my mother, and the rest of them, but I had been damaged myself. I took off work and grew silent. I didn't want to accept it. People gave me their condolences and tried to give me comfort in this time, and while I let it show on the outside it was fine, inside it wasn't. Any kind of my busy work was my escape. I even went back to work 2 days later, and no one understood, and it was, to be honest, neither did I. It took me several months to get over his death, only a couple of weeks after his 63rd birthday, and now I realize that he is in so much pain, and the death was his release. He is in a better place. I had to let him go and just remember that times we had and the lessons he taught me. Lost in a water park. I was about 8 years old when my family took a trip to Texas. We specifically went to San Antonio and were visiting as many of the famous sites as we could. At one point, we went into the water park that will remain nameless. My family and I were watching the sky on a giant wave machine using a surfboard. It was making a wave that had to be at least 20 feet tall, and he was riding it like a pro. We were just standing on the bridge and had a good view of the ride. I saw my sister push off the railing of the bridge from my far right and walk past me to the left. At least I thought I saw that. I swear to this day that I found my sister's twin and followed her. She went over to this long river that went around the park, but it was still kind of like a thing that led into a whirlpool that went inside the park. I followed and went down a really wide slide into the whirlpool and continued to follow my sister in front of me in a good distance around the whirlpool. I remember that she even plugged her nose every time she went underwater, just like my own sister did. I started to call her because I couldn't catch up. I wasn't losing ground, I just wasn't gaining any either. She didn't respond to my shouts, which may have started to sound frantic. At this time, I tried to stand in the whirlpool, but couldn't because it kept moving. I started to climb up to the edge, but it was still pulling at me. I rested for a second, but I felt like I was very worried that I may be lost. I was afraid I was going to get separated from my family out of state and might not be able to see them again. I was very scared and felt alone. I went downstream to the closest lifeguard and got up out of the whirlpool, much easier after I calmed down a little bit more. And I was still crying and I felt lost. I tried to explain what was happening or what happened to the lifeguard, but I don't think it really made much sense to him. I calmed down more, because I knew I was doing the best thing I could have done. I pointed towards where I came from. While I was looking, I saw my dad coming towards me down the whirlpool, and he looked relieved. But he also just looked so angry and worried simultaneously. He was still fighting that off a bit. I told the lifeguard I saw my dad and just went towards him. My dad came towards me and hugged me and held me. He could stand in the whirlpool. That's probably my worst memory. What no one knows. I've rarely told this story, even to myself. It is very painful to remember. The apartment was very dead. The kitchen, living room, and entry all seemed to flow into one another. Yellow linoleum in the kitchen and entry, generic retail store carpeting in the living area. One light fixture that hung above the door, casting a light with a greenish tint to it. In the living area, the only furniture present were 2 milk crates, one orange and one black, and an old TV. There, from the shadows of the hall, came the figure I most dreaded most. My father. My father wasn't present during most of my life up until then. When I was a baby, he tried to strangle me to death and then vanished. Around 3rd grade, he wanted back in my life. He was granted every Wednesday after school and every other weekend overnight stay. I could hide all I want, but on days I refused to go to the police were called, and my 3rd grade self hauled out of my mother's house, pajamas and all, with nothing more than my stuffed animal in hand. On this night in particular, I sat there on the hard, scratchy carpet waiting to be granted permission to enter my room at my dad's apartment. If I did anything without permission, punishment would occur. When I try to remember his face, all I can think about is rotting flesh seeping with black ooze. The only time I can really remember his face is when I look in the mirror. We have the same eyes. I've thought about gauging them out, but refrained because while they look the same, there's something different that lays behind each of ours. He came over in front of me, knelt down, and told me to kiss him. Not that loving father-daughter peck on the cheek, but that sick, twisted, and violating kiss that should never be shared among parent and child. On this night, I decided I did not want to give that to him. His hand came across my face and I barely reacted in fear. And because by this time I had been enduring this for 2 or 3 years and had become dead inside. He asked something of me again. He asked if I loved him. I said no. And with that, he grabbed my arm with such violence that I thought it would break. He yanked me into the room that was supposed to be mine, pushed me down, and said I couldn't come out. The door slammed and I was breaking inside. I slowly caught my breath and had been knocked out of me and sat up. I knew if I opened the door, he would be somewhere nearby and would get beat terribly. The only hope I had was one particular window. It was a strange window. It was really high up and perhaps could slide open. If I stood on my tippy toes, I could just barely see out. This was my only hope of escape. I tried with everything in my being to raise my body to its edge. My muscles were burning, but I couldn't do it. My room had nothing in it but a sliding wood closet that didn't really slide at all. The cheap carpeting and light fixture had the bulb taken out of it, so there was no light except for the outside window. But it was dark out, and the snow engulfed the outside world in silence. All I wanted to do was get away The only way at this moment that seemed like a possible solution to escape was death. The window's ledge stuck out a little bit from the wall and was a slight height at my forehead, so I decided to bang my head against it as hard as I could until the skin started coming off. And I was in so much pain. I don't remember for how long it continued, but it left a mark. At that time I had bangs, which could easily grant or deny access to my bloody bruised forehead. Death seemed nowhere in sight. No matter what I did, I couldn't do anything. The judge on the case was my dad's friend. My mom had been unstable since I was born. There was nothing I could do. No one believed the daughter of my mom. My brother and I were only half-brothers, and I watched him when I was 8 get beat to bloody pulp by his father. I screamed and begged him to stop hurting him. My mom was on the ground in pain. He hit me and I ran outside. There was a man mowing his lawn, and I didn't know to tell him, so I laid down on the cement patio and cried. Next thing I remember is being in the ambulance with my brother riding out of the gas station parking lot. My childhood was weird. At school I had been silent and didn't speak at all, and for that I was picked on. Rebecca and John kicked my shins under this desk until the skins tore away from them and they were all bruised up. The only friend I had was occasional Michael, but other times he would go with the other crowd too. At school, I was tortured, and at both my mom's and dad's places I was at well. For a year in elementary school, I met my dad again, and we were homeless. To think of this now is really painful for me. It makes me sad that my childhood was the worst memory I have. The apartment my dad would bring me to, I'd discover later, last year, that it was never listed as being in his possession. It was never listed as one of his residences in any of the records. This leads me to believe this was the only place he brought me to, like a hollowed heart that was burned black. I would never know where this place was because I don't remember the street names anymore. I've had so many dreams where I am my current age self and I am at my dad's apartment. There is my childhood self, and I will try with all of my might to save her. I wrap her in my arms and run outside barefoot in the snow. I run as far as I can to realize that she's gone limp in my arms and is covered in blood. She was always dead. In other dreams, my father is a black creature who talks in 4 distorted voices at once. He comes upon me and forces himself on me as he used to. At least in my dreams, he just tears my flesh apart and doesn't rob me of my precious qualities that should be shared with a lover. If I could with all my heart, I would save her. I would save her in my arms. I would hold her in my arms and weep as I told her she'd have to wait a long time until things got better. She'd have to wait at least another 6 years until things started to look up. I wish I could tell her not to hurt herself so much and that she's not the reason she has been hurt so many times. If I could, I would give her just one day to be a child, just one day to not worry. We could walk in the quiet falling snow of the night, in what lay beyond the single window of his apartment, just so she could see what was there. We could float above the darkness. We could leave this world of pain together. This story is something I have only told one other. I don't bother to burden others with this trouble of mine because I think it is unfair to do. Sometimes I yearn to get my story out. I never sought any counseling for this because as a child I was betrayed by a therapist. I don't like to talk in great length to many. To those I talk to in length, those are the ones I love the most. I spend most of the time thinking a lot, so sometimes I may appear cold or paying attention. I am, though. I am just listening. Every once in a while, if you catch me in a class at my end, I believe you can still see my face turn a certain way, and it is the moment I realize something from my past. Riley, we aren't especially close, but thank you for being kind to me when we see each other in our classes we have together. I cherish the small conversations I have had with you and others. There's a lot more I could talk about concerning my past and childhood, all of which is as hopeless as this, but I won't. I could go into detail forever the gore, violence, and incest that took place, but I won't. I'll let her have one more night to sleep.